Tales of the Narrow Gauge, Episode 8, Rusty and the Coaches. Sir Handel had been involved in an accident. Everyone had hoped that he wouldn't be severely damaged, but he was. He had to go to the works to be repaired. This left all the other engines with more work than before. The work was hard, but the engines managed. But then one day, it all became much worse. One morning, Skarloey pulled into Crovan's gate and stopped to let his passengers off. Duncan didn't know this, and so was expecting the station to be empty for him to pass through. He couldn't see ahead because the slates in his trucks had been loaded too high. He was heading for trouble. Bumped into the back of Skarloey's coach, and Skarloey came off the track. Duncan was worse though. One of his trucks had tipped over and now he perched on top of it. The news that another 2 engines were out of service was not what everyone wanted. The other engines were now worried. There would be too much work for them. Most of the other engines now had to take coaches. That left Rusty in charge of goods traffic. He didn't mind that. It was better than passengers as far as he was concerned. But he didn't like his other job one bit. He was station pilot at Crovan's gate. This meant that when trains came in, he often had to take their loads away. There was too much work for him on his own, and he couldn't always concentrate. The goods sidings hadn't been used for quite a while, but had recently been put back into service. This meant that many of them didn't have buffers on the end, and the ones that did, the buffers were not very strong. This caused Rusty to often have silly accidents. One day, Smudger was taking a passenger train. Rusty had brought 2 coaches to the platform, but that wasn't enough. There were too many passengers to fit inside the 2 coaches. They were getting impatient. Rusty had realised this and had quickly gone to collect the coach. But there was trouble at the station. "That diesel is not keeping my passengers waiting," said Smudger. "If he wants to do that, then he shouldn't be station pilot. I'm fetching my own coach." And he did. Smudger was uncoupled from his train and then made his way to the sidings to fetch himself another coach. "What are you doing?" asked Rusty, but Smudger didn't hear him. He saw a coach and darted for it, not realising that there weren't any buffers. Both he and the coach were off the rails. Rusty knew what had to be done and pulled the coach to the platform. All of the people who were left climbed in. Then the station master came out. "There isn't time to rescue Smudger. Rusty will have to take the train." Rusty wasn't sure, but he couldn't leave the passengers waiting. So the little diesel began to pull the train. At first he struggled, but then it all became rather easy, and he was on his way. Rusty couldn't believe it. He was enjoying pulling coaches for the first time that he could remember. "This is all rather nice," he thought to himself. After the long trip, Rusty and his coaches finally pulled into the top station. He was proud of himself. The passengers didn't stop on the platform to thank him like they did with the other engines. They were still cross because they'd had to wait a bit longer for their train, but Rusty didn't care. He thought he'd done an excellent job with the coaches, so he just sat and smiled in the setting sun.